Now, when somebody's called a distinguished fellow, you look up, because that's a big deal. And in the case of Steve Moore, it's true. Distinguished Fellow in Economics, Heritage Foundation. Steve Moore, how are you, my friend?
Hey, Mark, it's a privilege to be on your show. I listen to you almost every night on WMAL in Washington.
Yes, sir. You are terrific. Thank you, brother. Now, Steve Moore has been one of the great economists for decades. I remember him during even the Reagan years and so forth.
Yeah.
He doesn't look it. He looks like a very young man.
You and I both, we both served for Reagan, didn't we? I mean, I was in the Office of Management and Budget under Jim Miller, and we tried everything we could to balance the budget. We couldn't get Congress to cut spending, but it was, I'm pretty proud. I just want to say one thing, Mark. I've been able to work for the two greatest presidents of the last 50 years, Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. That's pretty cool.
That's true. Very true. Now, speaking of one of the worst, I want to talk about Joe Biden a second. He's going into a red state to take credit for what's going on in that state, South Carolina, and in all the red states. These red states, according to Bloomberg, they're depopulating at a scale we've never seen before. These blue states are. 2.2 million have left in 2 years. Business is moving into these red states. These red states aren't run by Joe Biden. They're run by Republican governors and legislatures. And he's taking credit for them. How do you square his record and what he's done nationally with his claims of all this great growth and economic activity in these red states?
Yeah, well, first of all, nationally, there's not much growth at all. Of course, the last 6 quarters, the economy has grown at just a little over 1%, which is pathetic. If we just stuck with the Trump policies, we'd be growing at 3 or 4% right now. So this is hardly an excuse for Biden trying to take a victory lap on the economy when the average family has lost about $3,500 to $4,000 in real income since Biden became president. By the way, that number was a positive $6,500 increase in income for the middle class when Trump was president.
So a $10,000 swing.
Exactly. Yeah. And almost all of the gains that were made under Trump have been erased under Biden. Now, you made a really interesting point, which is that we're really two countries right now. I mean, I don't say that with any joy, but we are red state America and we're blue state America. And the red states of the country, for the most part, are doing extremely well. There are 6 states in the South that are carrying much of the rest of the economy on their shoulders. And those states are, let's see, I think I can remember them all: Florida, Texas, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and I think I may have left out one, but there's one other state that account. Now, here's an amazing thing. Those 6 states that I just mentioned, their GDP, their contribution to the economy is larger now than the Northeast, which used to be the hub of the financial industrial sector of the United States.
Now, correct me. Which party, or explain, which party runs that part of the country?
Right. I mean, you've got just dysfunction in these states like New York and Connecticut and New Jersey and Maine and Rhode Island. They're run not just by Democrats, but by pretty radically liberal Democrats, and they've run these states into the ground. Now, Mark, you may or may not know that I was born and raised in Chicago, in the Chicago area, which I love Chicago. I think it's one of the great cities. Well, let me say this. It was once one of the greatest cities in the world. Not so much anymore. I mean, Chicago.
By the way, I can identify. I grew up in Philadelphia.
Yeah, same thing. Philadelphia is being ruined by progressive. But while we're on this subject, when you used to ask, progressives or liberals, well, point to a place where things are going well in the places that you rule, they would point Portland and San Francisco and Seattle. Have you been to those cities lately? They're basket cases.
I was to one of them, and I stepped in it.
Yeah. So
San Francisco, even Union Square is disgusting. It's unbelievable what they've done to that town.
Did you read, I don't know if you get our hotline we put out every morning, but Mark, I have to get that to you. But we had an item to this morning. I honest to God truth, I'm not making this up, Mark, and I bet a lot of your listeners are going to say, Steve Moore's making this up. It is not. That they have a commission on how to deal with, more racial equity. And one of the things they want to do is decriminalize urinating on the street corners.
They effectively have.
They probably have already done it.
I mean, they moved from urinating to pooping now. I mean, they're working up the scale.
Right. I mean, so these cities are being ruined by progressive left-wing policies, high taxes, terrible schools, the fact that they cannot control the crime. You know, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, I spent 10 years at the Wall Street Journal, and I used to go up each week to New York, and this was when Rudy Giuliani became mayor of New York. And I could see almost every week the improvement in that city because he got rid of the graffiti, he got rid of the petty crime. It was a pro-business policy. So you get the policies right.
And Stephen Moore, just to add, and now they want to get rid of Rudy.
They do, exactly. All the policies that Rudy put in place in New York have been reversed, and now the city's a mess. So, you know, you want to see growth in the economy. You want to see where people are happier. They're younger. They're more patriotic. It is red state America. It's the state. I do a rating every year for ALEC on the state that has the best economic climate. And you know, Mark, which state has come out number one every year for 15 years?
Let me think. Don't say.
Utah.
I was going to say Florida. Okay, Utah. Okay.
Well, Florida's like number 3, but Utah has come out number 1. It's the youngest state. Mormons have kids, unlike many other places when there's a shortage of kids. And Utah is a great place. Idaho is doing well. Florida is doing well. Texas, Tennessee. By the way, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee, Mark, what do those 3 states have in common?
I've been to all 3.
No income tax. No state income tax. You think that doesn't matter? I have a friend who moved from
Matters
Manhattan.
to me. I'm talking to you from Florida right now.
No, you are. I have a friend who just moved from Manhattan to Florida, to Miami. I mean, not Miami, to Palm Beach. And by the way, Palm Beach is not a cheap place to buy a house.
No.
He saved so much money on his taxes that he was able to buy his house in Palm Beach just on the money he saved from New York taxes.
Steve Moore, Distinguished Fellow in Economics, Heritage Foundation. Now, Steve Moore, how can Joe Biden claim that he slashed deficits by $1.7 trillion and yet massively increased spending against the opposition of the Republicans? I'm all confused here.
Well, I mean, because he is lying through his teeth on that one. He gets a Pinocchio that's so long it could hit the ceiling on that. And he says it over and over again. Nobody in the media ever challenges him on this, except for people like you, Mark. But here are the facts. I mean, Biden came in. Obviously, we had a big deficit in 2020 because of COVID, where we shut down wrongly. We shut down the American economy. So the deficit through
a lot of Democrats shut it down. Their states.
Well, they did.
Like Cuomo.
And Republicans, unfortunately. But the fact is that, and let me just give you an example. In the last 2.5 years, the 2.5 years that Joe Biden has been president, we have borrowed over $6 trillion. $6 trillion. He is easily the most financially reckless president in American history. In the last 12 months, even with COVID long over, you're not going to believe this, Mark. The United States government, in just the last 12 months, under this fiscally conservative president, has borrowed $2.1 trillion, which is one of the worst records in the history of the United States. So how can he get away with saying this? Because nobody in the media ever challenges him. It's the same thing with the jobs. He said, oh, look at all these jobs I've created. Mark, 94% of the jobs that have been created under Biden were just jobs that came back when we opened up the economy after COVID.
It is unbelievable. And he's running around attacking the Reagan economy, which was I think, if not the biggest, one of the biggest massive explosions of economic growth in American history.
It is so interesting to me that the left feels like they have to discredit Reagan even after all these years. And anyone who's old enough to have lived through that period, you remember what the economy was like during Jimmy Carter, don't you, Mark?
Oh, yeah.
It was a catastrophe. Every time you went to this, everything was marked up. You think inflation is bad now.
My mortgage rate was 12.5%.
Only 12.5%. Some people faced mortgage rates back then of 18%. The economy was in complete wreckage. Reagan put in a policy of deregulation, lower tax rates, budget control. Remember, Reagan very famously said in that debate against Jimmy Carter, government is not the solution. Government is the problem. And that's why the left hates him because he said government is the problem and the economy exploded. We had an 18-month period under Reagan, 83, 84, where the economy grew by almost 14%. I mean, it was like a miracle.
Unheard of.
How much the economy grew under Reagan. So they keep saying trickle-down economics. Middle-class families did better. Everybody did better under Reagan. And he not only rebuilt the American economy, he rebuilt the entire Western industrial world.
Steve Moore, I've heard it said that Joe Biden is actually confusing that phrase "trickle down" for his own bathroom habits. Have you heard that too?
I have not heard that one.
Wow, this is what I hear. I don't know if it's true. I just assume it is. So he's got trickle down. He can't get it out of his mind. What?
Well, they use that term trickle-down economics. And remember, they called it voodoo economics. And I'll never forget Reagan. One of Reagan's great quotes in 1984 when he was running for president, for re-election. When he squeaked by, winning 49 of 50 states.
Yeah.
And he said, I knew Reaganomics was working when they stopped calling it Reaganomics.
So what do you make of this jerk calling it Bidenomics? It's all propaganda, right?
It's propaganda. They think that this is they actually believe that their policies are working, Mark. I mean, what has happened to our debt in this country? When I came to Washington, and I don't know when you came. I came in around 83, 84. The entire national debt at that time, Mark, was about 1.8 trillion. Do you know what it is today? 31.8 trillion. Mm-hmm. Biden has added 6 trillion in 2.5 years. Under the most recent forecast, we're headed to 50 trillion. Even that budget deal that they made with the Republicans, there were some good parts of it, but instead of borrowing, 8 trillion over the next 10 years, we're only going to borrow 7.5 trillion.
Mm-hmm. This isn't going to end well, is it, Steve Moore?
This will cause a financial crisis at some point if we continue. I can't say when it's going to happen. I can't say it's going to happen in 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 or 3 years. But this story does not have a happy ending. When you have out-of-control government spending, when you have out-of-control government debt, debts have to be repaid. This is putting us in an incredible hole. And every day that this president is in office and he goes around the country telling people how well the economy is performing, no, but the good news is, Mark, 2/3 of Americans don't believe this for 1 second. Every poll shows 2/3 of Americans believe the economy and the country is headed in the wrong direction, and they're right. It is headed in the wrong direction. Let
me ask you to step out of your lane a touch, see if you're willing to address this. This is why I get so furious with the Chris Christies and the Asa Hutchisons and the Chris Sununos. They act like they'd rather Joe Biden win re-election than Donald Trump get the nomination and win the election. And I'm thinking to myself, are you not seeing what we're seeing? Are you out of your minds? And we have maybe 10, 20% of the rhinos of the Republican establishment types, whatever you want to call them, who view things this way. Isn't it frightening?
Well, I was proud that I worked on the 2016 campaign with Trump, and I've got to tell you, all those people were against him back then. Mark, remember? Mm-hmm. How many, they were all against him in 2016. They said he can't win, they said he's, at one point, all the prognosticators said a 1 in 100 chance of beating Hillary Clinton. Remember that? 1 in 100 chance.
But he's been president. Can't they give him credit for what he did?
And his economic record was spectacular. I mean, if it had not been for COVID, he would have won a Reagan-style reelection.
Yeah.
And that's why I wonder about where COVID really came from, because it was certainly convenient for the Democrats that happened when it did.
Shh. You're not allowed to talk about that in the Biden regime, remember?
Oh, I do.
In the media. They don't want to talk about it, but now it's quite obvious. It came out of the lab that the Communist Chinese military had a presence in the lab. They have a presence everywhere. It's not some kind of a free country. Oh, it's the scientists. Don't meddle with them. And I'm not saying they weaponized it. But let me ask you a question, Steve Moore. Why wouldn't they? In other words, it's not like they're restrained somehow. They're building a military to destroy us. So why wouldn't they at least work on these kind of bioweapons? I mean, why do people assume they wouldn't?
And of course, who does China not want to be in the White House? Donald Trump, right?
You're
they
right.
did everything they could to get rid of him because he was the first president in 30 years to stand up to China and recognize them as the villain and the enemy that they are. And so, by the way, right now,
who did they want to be in the White House?
Pardon me?
And who did they want to be in the White House?
Yeah. Well,
paid a lot of money,
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And right now, our Treasury Secretary is over in China and Beijing, sucking up to the Chinese.
It's like he's sending a cabinet secretary over there. You got a whole conga line of Neville Chamberlain's going over there. Can you please? And they're saying, okay, fine. Next. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, Steve Moore, if people want to follow you more, where do they go exactly? Is there somewhere to go? Do you have a site?
Well, yeah, I hope everybody will get and you need to get this, Mark. I'm going to ask
Send it to me.
Producer, our hotline we put out every morning. You can read it in 5 minutes. Newt Gingrich says it's the first thing he reads every morning. Go to Committee to Unleash Prosperity website, and you can get it for free.
So, Mr. Producer, let's put that on our social sites. The one social site we're not on is Facebook because I can't stand that little nerd. And definitely let him know where he can send it to me. And thank you, Steve Moore. We really appreciate you, buddy.
Okay, Mark. Have a great weekend ahead. Take care.
You too.